Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Chairman Schiff, thank you very much for joining us on this important night tonight. And I want to begin with what Donald Trump said there about insufficient evidence. It is striking that the President of the United States is claiming that there is just insufficient evidence to find that he participated in an international conspiracy with Russians to attack the presidential campaign in a way that would benefit him and work toward his election. The president then says that insufficient evidence equals innocent, which I don't think is true in anybody's legal definition of these terms. But your reaction to that, let's start with that, Congressman, that the president is standing on the point tonight of insufficient evidence. That's good enough for him.
Well, first of all, both the bar and the president make the same misdirection. That is, they say because the president wasn't charged, that means he's innocent. Well, here we're in a circumstance where the president cannot be charged. So he's not a typical defendant. He is a very atypical one. In fact, he's the only one in that position. And so that line of reasoning doesn't work at all. Rather, what Bob Mueller said, and I think the most important points he wanted to get across today were the Russians' effort to interfere in our affairs was systemic, it was sophisticated, and all Americans need to pay attention to it. That is, we need to protect the country going forward. And there's a lot more that we need to do. And that first begins by understanding what the Russians did. But second, and contrary to what Bill Barr has been suggesting for weeks and weeks now, if we could have exonerated the president, we would have. We didn't intend for the attorney general to arrogate it to himself, to declare the president had not committed the crimes of obstruction of justice. We intended this to be presented to Congress, and more than that, to preserve the evidence for other potential actions. And I think that should be read as meaning so the department can consider when he leaves office whether the president should be charged.
Robert Mueller began today talking about what is basically volume 1 of his report, which is his initial declared responsibility, investigating the Russian attack on our election. That's your jurisdiction in these investigations as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You have been seeking Robert Mueller's testimony about this. What did Robert Mueller say today that has changed, or has it in any way changed your view of your committee's need to hear from Robert Mueller?
It hasn't changed it in any way. I think Bob Mueller, as reluctant as he clearly is to testify, has more duty to perform for the country, and that is to come before the Congress and answer the questions of the American people about his report. There is a lot we still do not know. We don't know, for example, what happened to the counterintelligence investigation into whether people were compromised, whether there were crimes that were committed or not. And Lawrence, you pointed out exactly right, and this is a point that the president tries to obscure. The Department of Justice policy, as Mueller makes clear in his report but didn't get a chance to talk about today, requires before any charging decision is made, and clearly here he couldn't make a charging decision, to be able to satisfy a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. So when he talks about there being insufficient evidence, he also makes clear in the report that the fact they couldn't establish something beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't mean that there wasn't evidence of that fact. And here there's a lot of evidence of these illicit contacts with the Russians, compromising contacts that Mueller should testify about. We should have questions answered about why he didn't press for the president's testimony, why he didn't seek to press to determine whether counsel for these other people were participating in the lie Michael Cohen told to the Congress. There are a lot of unanswered questions that Mueller should come in and answer for the American people.
I want to let's listen to Robert Mueller referring to one point that I know you're interested in and Chairman Nadler's interested in, and that is the underlying work product, the information that went into building those paragraphs of the Mueller report. Let's listen to what he said about that.
Access to our underlying work product is being decided in a process that does not involve our office.
Are you involved in that process?
Yes, I am, and I'm a little surprised to hear him say that his office is not involved in that, because it was certainly our impression that there were discussions between his office and the Department of Justice about what they should turn over to Congress or be privileged. But now that that office is shutting down, it's certainly going to be true that this will be left entirely to the Department of Justice. We reached an agreement to provide initial documents on a rolling production basis to our committee. We're getting and have received already some documents as a part of that production, and we're going to press to make sure that we get all the information that we need. But again, that supplying of underlying evidence to our committee doesn't relieve Bob Mueller of the obligation, I think, to testify to the American people. There's nothing as powerful as hearing from both Mueller and other witnesses directly, their observations, their findings, in terms of recipient witnesses, what the president asked them to do and how he asked them to do it, the lies that he wanted propagated to try to obstruct the investigation. All of that should be brought out and not simply provided in documentary form.
What happened to the impeachment process in the House of Representatives today as a result of Robert Mueller going public?
I don't think that there's anything in his statements today that really moves the needle in one direction or the other. A lot of what he said was really to underscore what he had said in the report, to dispel some of the confusion that Bill Barr tried to create. He certainly, I think, made it clear again that this is being left to Congress now because he didn't have the power to indict. But he was also not willing to say Congress should impeach. I think that's consistent with his fairness argument that he made, that if he wasn't going to say the president should have been indicted, notwithstanding the department policy, then he probably wasn't going to say the president should be impeached, but rather that Congress should consider what repercussions should follow, what course to take, whether it's through an impeachment inquiry or through its oversight function. He left that to the Congress.
I just want to close our discussion. Robert Mueller's final words today that were, he addressed them to the country, but they were definitely aimed at you because you have jurisdiction over these elements that he was talking about in his final words of the day. Let's listen to that.
And I will close by reiterating the central allegation of our indictments, that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Thank you.
Your reaction to that, Chairman Schiff?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this is where he began and this is where he ended. And I have to think, although I don't know this to be the case, that he and his team may be frustrated with all of the focus on Donald Trump and his conduct and not as much focus on what the Russians did to interfere in our affairs. Part of his discussion of obstruction today was the reason why the obstruction was so serious is it was obstructing an investigation into a hostile power's interference in our democracy. And he is effectively saying at the beginning, at the end of his remarks today, let's not lose sight of what this adversary did. And I think implied there is let's not